In South Korea this morning, President Obama may have been a little too honest with another world leader, and those words with Russia's outgoing president were caught on tape.
The major irritant between the U.S. and Russia is NATO's intent to install a missile defense system in Eastern Europe, which it says is aimed only at detecting missiles fired from Iran. The Russians continue to object, saying that they fear it could be used against them. Vladimir Putin made it a big issue in his campaign to be re-elected president of Russia. Today, at the end of a meeting with Russia's outgoing president, Dmitry Medvedev, President Obama was overheard giving Medvedev a very candid political assessment of his ability to deal with missile defense and other issues, saying that it was important for the incoming president, Putin, to give him some space.
This is my last election. Yeah, after my election, I have more flexibility.
Yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and Stanford.
This is to Russia. This is, without question, our number one geopolitical foe. They fight every cause for the world's worst actors. The idea that he has some more flexibility in mind for Russia is very, very troubling indeed.
Well, you think Russia's a bigger foe right now than, let's say, Iran or China or North Korea? Is that what you're suggesting, Governor?
Well, I'm saying in terms of a geopolitical opponent, the nation that lines up with the world's worst actors. Of course, the greatest threat that the world faces is a nuclear Iran, and nuclear North Korea is already troubling enough. But when these terrible actors pursue their course in the world, and we go to the United Nations looking for ways to stop them, when Assad, for instance, is murdering his own people, we go to the United Nations, and who is it that always stands up for the world's worst actors? It is always Russia, typically with China alongside.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back, because the Cold War has been over for 20 years. But, Governor, when it comes to our foreign policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 1920s. You indicated that we shouldn't be passing nuclear treaties with Russia, despite the fact that 71 senators, Democrats and Republicans, voted for it.
But I'll respond to a couple of things you mentioned. First of all, Russia, I indicated, is a geopolitical foe. Not a,
Number one,
excuse me, it's a geopolitical foe. And I said in the same paragraph, I said, and Iran is the greatest national security threat we face. Russia does continue to battle us in the UN time and time again. I have clear eyes on this. I'm not going to wear rose-colored glasses when it comes to Russia or Mr. Putin. And I'm certainly not going to say to him, I'll give him more flexibility after the election. After the election, he'll get more backbone.
Governor Romney is mired in a Cold War mindset. He acts like he thinks the Cold War is still on.
He's even blurted out the preposterous notion that Russia is our number one geopolitical foe.
It's somewhat dated to be looking backwards.
The statements that Governor Romney makes show little understanding of what is actually going on in the 21st century.
It's a really curious statement given that the Cold War has been over for some time.
A throwback to the Cold War. I mean, we work with Russia all the time.
He's not a dumb man, but he said something that was clearly dumb.
Is an antiquated worldview.
Is he trying to play Ronald Reagan here or what? What's he up to?
The 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back, because the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
After revolution in Kiev, Russian tanks, choppers, and troops moved into Crimea.
Really bad echoes of the Cold War happening right now in Ukraine, where there are now reports Russian troops have moved into Ukraine and Crimea. Specifically, only moments ago, the President of the United States, unscheduled, went into the White House briefing room to issue a strong warning to Russia. There will be costs, the president says, of any military intervention in Ukraine.
It's somewhat dated to be looking backwards.
What I said yesterday is that the claims by President Putin and other Russians that they had to go into Crimea and maybe further into eastern Ukraine because they had to protect the Russian minorities. And that is reminiscent of claims that were made back in the 1930s when Germany, under the Nazis, kept talking about how they had to protect German minorities in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, and elsewhere throughout Europe. So I just want everybody to have a little historic perspective. I'm not making a comparison, certainly, but I am recommending that we perhaps can learn from this tactic that has been used before.
The statements that Governor Romney makes show little understanding of what is actually going on in the 21st century. Much longer term plan that Putin has had, which is to try to recreate some form of relationship between Ukraine and Moscow. I think that is the tragedy that's going on. Putin is, in many ways, I think, delusional about this.
He's even blurted out the preposterous notion that Russia is our #1 geopolitical foe.
What we need now to do is not get into an old Cold War confrontation. We need to work together in what does not have to be a zero-sum game to provide the capacity of the people of Ukraine to choose their future. That's all that's at stake.
Russia has engaged in a military act of aggression against another country, and it has huge risks. It's a 19th century act in the 21st century. The president is currently considering all options. They're all on the table.
The fundamental problem here, I say to my friend from Connecticut, is that this president does not understand Vladimir Putin. He does not understand his ambitions. He does not understand that Vladimir Putin is an old KGB colonel bent on restoration of the Russian Empire. It was Vladimir Putin that said the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century was the downfall of the Soviet Union. The senator from Connecticut should understand that what this is all about. And this president has never understood it. This president is the one that ridiculed Mitt Romney when Mitt Romney said our great enemy was Russia and its geopolitical threats, said the Cold War has been over for 20 years. This president believes the Cold War was over. Vladimir Putin doesn't believe that the Cold War is over. And when the President of the United States is overheard to say to Mr. Putin's puppet, Mr. Medvedev, say, tell Vladimir that after I'm reelected, I will be more flexible. We get that? Tell Vladimir, after I'm reelected, I will be more flexible. This is the same president that believed that somehow that Vladimir Putin had anything but the ambitions which he is now realizing in the Ukraine.
Way back in 2008, Sarah Palin warned that the president's foreign policy would, get this, embolden Vladimir Putin to invade the Ukraine next.
After the Russian army invaded the nation of Georgia, Senator Obama's reaction was one of indecision and moral equivalence, the kind of response that would only encourage Russia's Putin to invade Ukraine next.
What a dummy, right? The media, of course, called that prediction strange, an extremely far-fetched scenario.